Wake up. Wake up.
Christian defended extortionate bonuses.
I'm not a person of despair, I'm a person of hope. And I think that we have to tolerate the inequality as a way to achieving greater prosperity and opportunity for all.
The fundamental Christian view, and I would say of Islam as well, and certainly of Judaism, is that wealth is to be shared. Money has to be shared. You can't take it with you. And from that develops a whole lot of stuff about justice and the economy and so on. And we've lost that, and instead we've got people accumulating more and more. And I just think it's disgusting that people have lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they can't pay their mortgages from bankers who made a big mistake and then paid enormous bonuses. I'm sorry, that is simply wrong. And I can't understand why we are not more vociferous about that.
When rich people tell you that they specifically have to be rich through these egregious rip-off mechanisms, that's just self-serving propaganda and it should be disregarded. It is true that when you organize human society, some people get ahead and some people struggle. That's a natural mechanism. But saying, oh, we've got to have inequality, therefore Goldman Sachs must be organized along the following lines, that's a complete non sequitur.
At what juncture, at what point does morality enter into the economic calculus? In a way, many people think that Adam Smith gave us a free pass, a way not to think about morality. Because what Adam Smith said was that individuals in the pursuit of their self-interest are led as if by an invisible hand to the general well-being of society. Now let me make it clear, Adam Smith didn't really say that. That is to say, Adam Smith was very much aware that businesses, when they got together, conspired against the public interest, raised prices. He was aware of monopoly. He was aware of the importance of education that the private sector couldn't provide. So he himself was aware of all the limitations, but his latter-day descendants have forgotten all those caveats.
Adam Smith was the godfather of classical economics, but since its publication, his work has been used as a political football, financiers twisting his words to suit them. Lord Griffiths advocates ruthless individualism to push this idea that if bankers get rich, then we get rich too, through a process known as trickle-down economics, or horse and sparrow theory. If you feed the horse enough oats, some will pass through to the road for the sparrows. The idea is that extreme wealth concentrated on a small minority will eventually trickle down to everyone else. But it doesn't work. Because by the time the money reaches the people at the bottom of our money pyramid, it's lost its purchasing power. But the public are now confused as to why our political leaders have allowed this to happen, and quite naturally now ask why.
Because our political processes are badly flawed. They're badly flawed because of the dependence on lobbyists, on campaign contributions. So that's why, my view and a view I think of a lot of people is that we have to restructure our political processes to give more voice to the ordinary citizen and less voice to the interest group, to the moneyed groups, to those who have taken such a large role in shaping our tax code, our regulatory regulations, and so forth.
I stood on the front step of Colin Powell's house, and I look at him and say, what next, boss? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, what next? Where are you going next? I'm going to write my book. I said, no, I know you're going to write your book, but you're not going to do that for the rest of your life. Where are you going next? He said, maybe a cabinet position, but first, money. I said, money? He said, yeah, millions. That's the only way you can be a cabinet officer in the American government. oh, wow. The Democrats and the Republicans are beholden to corporate interests, and until they become unbeholden to those corporate interests, we will never have a well-governed republic.
The inherent inequity in our system of money, banking and politics has not just had consequences domestically, but also on a massive scale globally. Western leaders have presented their military campaign in Iraq, Afghanistan and Pakistan as a moral obligation. But are there other reasons for it? The first financial beneficiary of America's foreign policy is the military. In particular, those who supply it with arms and equipment. The military has won wars, but how successful has it been in its bigger aim to eradicate terrorism?
The drone attacks not only failed, but they've created extra extremism. They've helped in radicalization of youth in the northwest frontier and also in certain parts of Punjab and Pakistan. And because time after time, and sometimes, there's a feeling that America does this deliberately to destabilize Pakistan. I'm not so sure about that, but I certainly think those people who actually support this policy, every time you kill 10, the so-called terrorists, you create 500 more because they see the drone attacks as an attack on a sovereign state of Pakistan.
If they really wanted to flush them out, there was no need for a huge military operation in Swat, causing the entire district to become internally displaced persons. The population of Swat is 1.8 million. There are 2.3 million refugees in the country. The whole district has been emptied. This wouldn't have been necessary if they had carried out a surgical commando operation to get the militant leaders. But they allowed them to escape, all of them.
After the military, the next financial beneficiary are those who win the contracts to conduct the rebuilding process. In the West, people might even feel optimistic when they hear that the US is pumping tens of billions of newly created dollars into developing nations to build infrastructure. But often this too doesn't seem to achieve the publicized goals. Is there another reason we give these countries aid?
We economic hitmen have created the world's first truly global empire, and we've done it primarily without the military. We work many different ways, but perhaps the most common is that we'll take a third world country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. However, the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, highways, industrial parks, things that benefit a few wealthy families in that country as well as our corporations, but don't help the majority of the people at all. They're too poor to buy electricity or drive cars on the highways. They don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, but they're left holding a huge debt.
Infrastructure which has used heavy loans from the World Bank and IMF and made from grants from Western countries, they've all gone into benefiting the elite and the feudal classes. They have not benefited the people.
A lot of money goes to these consultants and companies from the West who charge huge amounts of money, and actually the real money on projects and on ordinary people is very limited. The masses have very little already. So those landlords who have the infrastructure and who are going to make money because of the infrastructure that is built through their roads, they will prosper. But the ones who don't have any resources, they've not had jobs, there isn't an economic activity for them in terms of manufacturing goods so they can sell and they can also prosper. When you don't have that, what do? They resort to joining the Taliban because they see the enemy coming in and taking away what little bit they have.
President Obama, I understand, wants to invest $7.5 billion in Pakistan's infrastructure to alleviate poverty and, take away all the divisions and all the anti-American sentiment over here. Whatever his reasons are, we can do without it. In fact, it's the worst possible thing he can do. This kind of help is actually going to be a hindrance. It's just going to make matters worse. It will bring this contrived war and terror into our rural areas.
How much of US foreign policy is genuinely altruistic? And how much is it influenced by the banks and corporations that profit so tremendously from it?
America's evangelism of democracy is riddled with contradictions, not least of which this idea of promoting democracy at the point of a gun, or opposing regimes which are democratic but not in the way that America wants. So too, this idea that America has been promoting free market capitalism has also been riddled with contradictions, because the reality is that American firms tend to make most money when countries are at the cusp of change, certainly American financial firms, and in a sense they want markets that are changing structurally, but not too free and too transparent, because they make money when markets are a bit opaque.
Is it any wonder developed nations are fighting in underdeveloped countries when so many are making so much money out of it, without ever really having to face up to or even witness the consequences of their actions?
So what if 5 million kids died in Africa because of debt last year? I got a bonus of £1 million, and if I have that conversation, I've had it with some bankers who've been in the business a long time, and they listen politely, very polite, very charming, and at the end they say, well, Tariq, it's lovely meeting you again, and they go back to the office and do another loan deal for Tanzania or something.
I've known a lot of terrorists, quote unquote. I've met them, I've interviewed them for books, I've known them since I was an economic hip, and I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They all want to be with their families back on the farm. They're driven to terrorism because they've lost the farm. It's been inundated with water from a hydroelectric project or with oil from oil derricks. Their farm's been destroyed. They can't make a living for their kids. Or in the case of the Somali pirates, their fishing waters have been destroyed. And that's why they've turned to this. It isn't because they want to be pirates or terrorists. Now, there may be a few crazy people. There are a few crazy people with their nuts loose. There'll always be serial killers. There'll always be crazy people. Maybe Osama bin Laden's one of them. But they do not get a following unless there's a terrible injustice going on. And people are starving and they're deprived. And then they will follow these crazy people because they seem to offer an alternative. If we want to do away with terrorism, if we want to have what we in the United States call homeland security, we've got to recognize that the whole planet is our homeland.
What does the word terrorist actually mean? Many terrorists would sooner describe themselves as freedom fighters. Could it be that the charge of terrorism could just as easily be made against Western corporations, speculators, and policymakers?
When we talk about terrorism, it means what they do to us, not what we do to them. And what they do to us can be pretty ugly, although it's not even a fraction of what we do to them. I mean, take, say, 9/11. That was a pretty serious act of terrorism, maybe the worst single act of terrorism in history. But it could have been worse. I mean, suppose, for example, that Al-Qaeda had bombed Washington. bombed the White House.